malnutrition cause a consequence of poverty in South Africa. And then I want to focus on the fact that the author uses opinion-based statistics, and finally how nutrition influences productivity, and then the conclusion. So main arguments of the chapters. First of all, many people think that or define poverty as hunger, and it is true that there are more than 1 billion people who actually suffer from hunger, which is actually defined as live below $1 per day. And nevertheless, there's more than enough food produced in the world to feed everyone on the planet, which means it's more the distribution of food and not the lack of food overall. And they are not just subsidizing programs in governments in rich countries, but also in poor countries or in developing countries, for example, in Egypt or Indonesia. They also have food subsidy programs established for decades. But even though there's still there are still people who suffer from not having access to enough food. So that's one of the parts where the author start the introduction of the chapter. So, and it all comes down the author argument that there's some kind of inability of the poor to feed himself, or how you could also call it is a vicious circle of nutrition-based poverty. And it all starts with the fact that the poor cannot afford to eat enough, and as a result, they become less productive and lose strength. And because of the lack of productivity and strength, they're more likely to lose their job and are no longer able to work. And if the breadwinner of the family loses the job, that also affects, for example, the children. The children lose their education, they also have to find a job. And because of the lack of education, they won't be able to get a high-paying job, and they will have to find a job, for example, construction work or in the agricultural sector. And this will lead to the fact that they are also damned to poverty. Moreover, there's the fact that diseases spread and mortality rates increase. And this also is a financial burden for the family. And it all ends with the fact that the second generation is trapped on the same poverty their parents lived at the beginning, because the children never had the chance to get rid of the circle. So, and it all starts again with the fact that the second generation also cannot afford enough to eat, even though they work. So, moreover, the authors also refer to the S-shaped curve in the nutritional poverty trap. We already know this curve from chapter 1, which was presented last week. And this curve can also be applied in chapter 2. And the authors used it on the y-axis to explain the quality and quantity of food and its relation to productivity and income tomorrow. So what we can see is that, if you do not overcome this threshold level, this obstacle, there's no ability for the poor. Basically, that's the argumentation to escape the poverty trap zone. So if you're below the threshold level, you're damned to stay in poverty, because the quality and quantity of food is too low to climb up the social ladder. And then there's also then there's also the A-shaped curve and large gains at low levels, which basically says that the early amounts of quality and quantity of food can lead to huge productivity and income results tomorrow. So the more food you get, if you're really poor and lack nutrition, the higher the effects will be to a specific point. So the large gains of food consumptions are basically gained at low levels of food consumption, and there's after a specific point no steep jump in income once people are starting to eat enough. That's the second way of argumentation. So now we go over to the question: are there really 1 billion hungry people? And therefore, the author's argument that the poor do not use the full extent of economic resources they actually have. So they have many options what to do with their money, and they tend to use it for irrational investments. And how the author's argument is basically that he puts up some statistics, and one thing is what I show in this graph is that they spend up to 30% on other things than essentials. And essentials would be, for example, things like nutrition or shelter. and medical emergencies, and the other 30% are not spent on those things they like really need to live. And then there's the other question: what would happen if like the income of the poorest of the poor would increase? And then he puts up a statistic. Then the author put up a statistic that 1% increase in income would just lead to a increase of food expenditure at around 0.67%. So even though the income increases and the poor lack like quality and quantity of food, not every extra dollar they get is spent on food. So that's an interesting fact. And then the author explain how and why the poor spend their money. And if you look there at the statistic, the authors argument that they spend their money, for example, on festivals, on DVD players, CD players, radios. And the reason for this is that things that make life less boring are a priority for the poor. And there's a basic human need for pleasure, and life at the bottom can be quite boring. And even though you might lack calories, you might lack quality and quantity of food, you will be more likely like to spend it on those things to like maybe get to enjoy life a little bit. Moreover, there's a second point that social norms force people to spend large sums on weddings and funerals, dowries, etc. And this is a fact that's established in many like poor countries over decades due to like cultural reasons. And the problem is like if you're poor, you're more likely to get a disease, and if you're more likely to get a disease, you're more likely to die. So people even die at a younger age, and funerals are even more expensive. So it's even a bigger burden for the family. It's the same with marriages. People marry at a way earlier age than in developed countries, so it's even more expensive. Some countries even try to regulate it, but the authors say that it still doesn't work. So there are other reasons like where the poor also spend their money. So one reason is that of course medical emergencies, but also other reasons is that they spend their money, or they choose their food based on how good it tastes and not how healthy it is, and that's also why they spend a huge amounts on alcohol and tobacco, which is addictive and tastes good, but basically isn't healthy. Other reasons for why they still do not like spend their money on the right quality and quantity of food is that they have no incentive to become more productive. If you're at the bottom and you have no like long-term view for a better future, you might even do not want to try it. And then there's also the problem that there's a lack of education, because many people do not recognize the value of high quality diet for themselves and their children. And another reason is like people like in the small villages are really like suspicious of outsiders trying to tell them what to eat. So if there comes some like faraway scientist and wants to force them and like wants to have a strong impact on their life, they might not really want to adapt to it. So so to the final conclusion of the authors is there really a nutrition-based poverty trap? And one of the final conclusion of this chapter the authors make is that rising income will not lead to a better nutrition in the short term. So we have seen the graphics that even though like $1 your income might increase at like 10 cents, it will just like around 6 cents will spend more on food, but not the whole 10 cents you might get. And the quantity of food is often not the problem, but the quality is. So therefore, the author's argument, like with intelligence and height and how it is related to the like nutrition. And another factor is that unborn infants and young children benefit most from good nutrition. So the focus shouldn't be basically on like trying to first feed all, but especially like pregnant women and young children, because they're in the like development phase where they would still benefit from getting those extra quality and quantity foods to like grow taller and have a higher IQ. And one solution the authors present is that you could use food packages with micronutrients, or like specific crops that are high quality and quantity, so they have good macro and micronutrients as well. And yeah, that for them this is a possible solution. So now I'm going over to part 2, the critical analysis. So therefore, I want to focus on the vicious cycle of nutrition-based poverty, what the authors already put out, and therefore I will focus on the research paper from South Africa. And the next point is that I want to focus on opinion-based statistic the author uses. And the third point is that I want to talk about how nutrition influences productivity, what the author also already taught, and then go over to the final conclusion. So then there's a research project for malnutrition cause or consequence of poverty in South Africa. And what's actually like interesting about South Africa is that it's a multicultural, multi-ethnic country, and that they have problems with obesity because there's such a big like division, as well as problems with undernourishment. And so the research paper basically presents an overview of nutritional problems in South Africa, and it especially is focusing on the poor people there. And therefore, they also emphasize the double burden of nutrition-related diseases and the result of link between poverty and malnutrition. And as you can see here, they established a specific vicious circle. So basically, what they did is they established even like more and not as comprehensive as the authors already did, but they did an even bigger visual cycle, and they especially like focus on malnourished pregnant women. So as we can see, the main problem they argue is that there's first of all poverty and low income, capability deprivation, and food insecurity, and this leads to the fact that there are malnourished pregnant women. And if a woman is malnourished at an early age, like there's an undernourished fetus, and then they call this ABWB, which means low baby weighted, which means low birth weighted babies. So if the babies are born, they are already undernourished, so they have bad potential to develop. And as a result, they are physically and mentally stunted children. And if they are physically and mentally stunted children, then they are also like stunted adults. So what we can basically see that this kind of vicious circle like agrees in many terms what to the point the authors already mentioned, that if the first generation is trapped in poverty, the second generation is also like them to be trapped in poverty because of the lack of high quality and quantity food. Just they put an even bigger focus on the fact that if you want to try to solve it, you should directly focus on malnourished pregnant women. So I stopped here at the stunted adults, and if we can see, like, if you're a stunted adult, which like also means like some form of undernourishment, then you have an increased risk of NCDs. So this means these are just some form of disease you do not like, you do not normally get. The other point is like that you also are low human capital, they call it. So your ability to like do high-paying jobs is really bad because you're not really productive. You do not have a good education, and as a result, you're low income and jobless. And then this vicious circle all over starts again. And we also have like this increased morbidity and mortality problems. So basically, this research paper agrees with many points the authors already made. And if we go to the next point, the solutions are also quite the same. So it is just like I already said, that they focus more on younger women than like on the overall population. So one solution is that it should be accompanied by education, better healthcare, and the creation of opportunities for income generation. So also one point the authors already made, like that you should focus on education, because how should people consume the right food if they do not even know what food they have to consume? And but also better healthcare, because there's also like if you're like ill, you cannot work, and if you cannot work, you cannot afford the food. So yeah, this is also an important point. And the next thing is that they want to emphasize the importance of targeting women in their productive years, and they want to access women's secondary school feeding program. The reason for this is that like women in secondary schools, like in many poor countries, are the one who will get pregnant at an early age, and the best way like to like to go to the deep down to the problems, like I've shown before, like the fact that if women are undernourished, the fetus undernourished, and the baby is underweight after birth, the best way to fight it is probably through a school feeding program for women. And one more thing is like that they want to pregnant women to attend alternative clinics, and there they should be supplemented with micronutrition, so that that they therefore like you do not only like can fight the quantity but also the lack of quality of high quality food. So the overall they would expect with those measurements an empowerment of the poor. So the second point I want to make is that the authors use opinion-based statistics. So that's more like some kind of criticism from my side. And at one point, they referred to a survey they did in India, and quote unquote, they said the percentage of people consider that they do not have enough food has dropped dramatically over time from 70% in 1983 to 2% in 2004. So, and if you do a survey and you just like look at what if people perceive that if they have enough food or if they don't have enough food, so this is actually not a fact. Like it would be a fact, like if you would collect empirical evidence about the amount of calories people have to consume, and then you look how much they actually consume, and then you can go from like a specific amount of time and then compare those two factors, and then you actually have like a real number if people have enough food to eat or if they do not actually have it. So therefore, I looked up the facts how in reality is to today in India, and still in India there are about 180 million people, or like 40% of the population is undernourished, and 20% of the children under 5 are underweight, and 34.7% of the children under years of 5 are stunted, and 51.4% of women reproductive age from 14 to 40 years are anemic, so they lack the white blood. And so what actually those facts tell us that like this is completely different than the reality which was presented here. Right. So the last point is how nutrition influences productivity, and therefore the authors say like, but the problem may be less the quantity of food than its quality and the particular shortage of micronutrients. And to this quote, I can say that I agree that you should also like focus on the quality of micronutrients, because like as we have also seen in the research paper before, like micronutrients can have a huge impact like on the development, for example, of a baby, and can really help pregnant women. But if we like go back like again also to the vicious circle that people who are not able to eat enough are less productive, then that will also affect how much food they can buy. So, and if you there was another research paper, and they said that 60 to 75% of the energy intake of someone in nutrition balance goes towards maintenance, and the remaining 40 to 25% spent on discredited activities like work and leisure activities. So it's also really important to still focus like on those remaining 40 to 24%, 40 to 25%, because this will give give like people the power with this really intense construction and agricultural jobs to still like work and still like stay and try to like get out of the poverty trap. So and I want to like end this presentation with two quotes. One was from the first one is from the research paper in South Africa, and the second one is from the book. So a vicious cycle exists through which both poverty and malnutrition fuel and reinforce each other. Globally, the poorest countries are the countries bearing the highest burden of malnutrition. And then the authors of poor economics say, but there are all too many instances where food policy remains hung up on the idea that all poor need is cheap grain. So what the most important points maybe to like gain from this chapter is that like poverty cannot simply be nutrition based poverty cannot simply be solved just if you subsidize food or just if you like try to establish simple ideas, but it's rather far more complicated. For example, it might be more intelligent to intelligent to focus really on pregnant women and early childhood of children, or more on schools, than actually try to do it all at once with the whole population. Yeah, and this is my appendix, and yeah, thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Johan, for your presentation. I think we had two very good presentations here on the topic that give us also lots of stimulations for the discussion. But as we did last time, I first would like to ask you whether you have any clarification question to either of the presenters. So only